So this is our second part of Project 1, our skeletal letters project. Project 1, Part 2 will deal with letter width. So let's define what we're talking about first. The term weight describes the thickness of a letter's strokes. So light, regular, bold, these are all descriptions of weight. When you are using your computer and you switch from Verdana to Verdana bold, you're changing the weight. Width describes the ratio of a letter's width to its height. How wide is it compared to how tall it is? Some descriptions of width are condensed, normal, and expanded. These are just a few of the widths out there. We talked a little bit about the concept of width when we were talking about proportion and shape last week. And you saw this infographic. The top row of this graphic shows a condensed, a normal, and an expanded lowercase e that are all the same shape. That's what we're going to start working with this week. Last week you worked solely with the normal width. This week we're going to work with the condensed width and the expanded width. So before we get into what we're going to do, I want to show you some examples of width in commercial typefaces. And actually, when we talk about width, we are usually referring to a typeface family. A typeface family is a group of typefaces that are designed to work together, that have the same general design with some variations. Often regular and italic are some of the variations, variations of weight, sometimes variations of width. So if you have Helvetica regular italic, Helvetica bold, Helvetica bold italic. Those are four typefaces within the Helvetica family. So this is the Trade Gothic family. This is all of the typefaces within the Trade Gothic family. It was published between 1948 and 1960, which is very unusual. Usually a typeface family is published all at once in 1 year. What happened here was Jackson Burke designed some typefaces in the regular width, published them in 1948. They became very popular. People really liked, designers really liked using Trade Gothic. As they became more popular, then he decided to release some narrower widths. Narrower or condensed widths are usually very useful for display copy, like headlines in ads, just because they can be bigger while taking up less width. They can be taller because they take up less horizontal space. So people really like them for headlines. People really like them for fitting in a bunch of information in a short space. So he designed the condensed widths, released them, published them as he designed them, and then I believe the last ones he designed and published were the two extended widths, extended and bold extended. So it makes for a slightly unusual family in that it wasn't designed all together. It was released over a wide range of time. It means that there are some subtle inconsistencies and quirks between the different typefaces in the family. However, it is a beloved type family amongst designers. Still many designers go to type family today. I use it all the time personally. So not bad for something that's over 50 years old. Universe is one of the very first multi-weight, multi-width families that was designed as a logical system. Adrian Frutiger designed this system in the 50s. This was first published in 1957 with 21 different variations. And you can see that there are several variations in weight, and there are several variations in width. We actually have 4 different variations in width. Each color on this chart represents a different width. This was an incredibly popular typeface and remains a very incredibly popular typeface. Because it is so systematically designed, it makes it very easy for a designer to use and switch between weights and widths very easily. There are not a lot of quirks when working with this. It has remained so popular for so long that Adrian Frutiger, with an assistant, updated the family and added to it. So this is Universe Next that was published in 2010. You remember the first, this family as first published had 21 variations of weight and width. Universe Next has 52 variations. So you see we're going to much heavier weights like the extra black. We're going to much lighter weights like the ultra light. We also have italics for all of the extended widths, and the weights have been expanded in the extended width, the regular width, and the condensed width. So this is 2010, 1957. You can see they basically just filled out the square of that chart, except for the compressed. You can only make the compressed, which is extremely narrow, you can only make it so bold. So if they tried to go beyond the medium compressed weight, all of your counter spaces would actually fill in and be impossible to see. So that's why they stopped with medium compressed, and I believe they didn't bother with compressed italic because it would just be very, very difficult to read, and these very, very thin typefaces are usually only used very large for display copy. So they probably wouldn't be that useful. All right, the Verb family, which was published in 2012 by Ryan Martinson. Let me see, it has 4 widths and 9 weights. So this is a fairly large multi-weight, multi-width family. And you can see from the letter styles, this is actually a humanist style sans serif family. The FFmore family, published 2010, 3 widths, 5 weights. I include this just so that, just to help make it clear that typeface width is not limited just to sans serif typefaces. It also exists in the world of serif typefaces. It is a little bit more difficult to do. You'll notice that the differences between the regular and wide and the regular and condensed, the width differences aren't as extreme as they are in some of the sans serifs, and we also don't get into extremely condensed or extremely wide in this particular design, just because in serif typefaces that have more stuff going on, it becomes far more difficult to read the final result. This family, the 8 is the working title of this typeface family, because all my round characters are instead 8-sided. This is a family I'm working on designing. It's a work in progress. It still needs a lot of love. But as you can see, I have 5 different weights, 4 different widths. You may also notice these red stars next to 3 different styles, the 3 styles in the corners. I put those in there to explain something. It is much easier for type designers now working with 21st century digital tools to create variations of weight and width. For this particular family, I designed those 3 weights with the stars: the light, the extra bold, and the light extra condensed. Those are the only 3 weights that I actually drew all the letters for. Then I set parameters for the computer to interpolate the weights and widths in between. So I told the computer I want 5 steps of weight between here and here. Each step should be X percent, and it figures it all out. Same thing with width. I want 2 additional steps between my regular width and my very, very narrow width, and it interpolated the condensed and the extra condensed for me. So this is why multi-weight, multi-width, very large typeface families have become more common in the past 20 to 30 years. Not because they're more useful or it's a trend. I think it's honestly because it's far easier for typeface designers to do the massive amount of work involved, because computers can do a big chunk of it for us. All right, so let's talk about width outside of the family. Width is a useful descriptor regardless of the design. Just as an example, our top row, we have trade Gothic, the condensed, the regular, and the extended of the trade Gothic regular weight. Below that, I have 3 completely unrelated serif typefaces: Gloucester, Century Schoolbook, Wide Latin. You can see that even though the 3 typefaces on the bottom are completely different designs from each other, they are not part of a family with each other, it is still very useful to describe them in terms of width. That Gloucester is very, very narrow. Century Schoolbook has a very normal width. Wide Latin, of course, has a very wide width. So we can talk about this dimension of a typeface regardless of whether it's part of a family or not. So let's get back to our project. Part 2 of Project 1. Now you remember this infographic dealing with proportion and shape. We worked entirely with the normal proportion, which is in the middle of the top there, for part 1. In part 2, you're going to work with the condensed and the expanded. And this graphic is in your part 2 brief. This shows how to actually figure the condensed and expanded widths, or the narrow and wide widths, using our guidelines, using our system that we've been using for the skeletal letters. So the regular width that we worked on last week in most lowercase letters is 2 squares. Condensed is half of that width. Expanded is 150% of that width. So to go from the regular 2 squares wide to go to the condensed would be 1 square wide. If our regular is 2 squares wide, to go to the expanded width would be 3 squares wide. It will be fairly simple with the lowercase, since most letters are only 2 squares wide. It gets a little bit more complicated with our uppercase. You remember we have our 2 different proportional systems for uppercase. We have the component proportions and we have the even proportions. The condensed and expanded widths, or narrow and wide widths, relate to the varying sizes of component proportions. So you can see in our geometric sample here that the capital A is 3 squares wide, the capital C is 4 squares wide, and the capital E is 2 squares wide in the regular width. So if we cut that width in half, the condensed A is 1.5 squares wide, the condensed C is 2 squares wide, and the condensed E is 1 square wide. Going the other way, our expanded capital A is 4.5 squares wide. Our expanded capital C is 6 squares wide. Our expanded capital E is 3 squares wide. Now you may notice something, that our geometric style is based entirely on triangles, rectangles, and perfect circles. Well, this means that in the condensed width, instead of what were circles are now ovals, with the taller dimension being the vertical one. And then the expanded width, it's the opposite. What were circles are now ovals, with the wider dimension being the horizontal one. When we get to our even proportions, like the grotesque style, the width changes still apply. It's just going to be a little bit easier because the regular width grotesque capitals are almost all 3 squares wide. So that means the narrow capitals will almost all be 1.5 squares wide. The expanded will almost all be 4.5 squares wide. So, what is your project? What is part 2 of your project, I should say? It's very simple. You're going to go through the lettering styles. You're going to choose 2 of the lettering styles. You get to you get to throw away one. Whichever lettering style was your least favorite, you don't have to do it for part 2. So step 9 in the directions is to choose your favorite lettering style, whichever one of the 3 was your favorite, and practice condensed width and expanded width in that style. Practice is the same way that you did part 1. Go through the alphabet, draw each letter, draw it at least 5, no more than 10 times. Check the shape, check the proportion. So first do condensed, everything will be half as wide. Then do the expanded, everything will be 1.5 times as wide. Then step 10 is to choose the second lettering style. So whichever lettering style was not your least favorite, but it was your second favorite, you can do that for step 10 and do practice condensed and expanded widths on those. Once you've practiced 2 widths in 2 styles, then you want to take your pangram from part 1 and do 2 more copies of it. So when you get to step 11, choose one of the 2 alphabet styles that you have practiced narrow and wide widths for, and write 2 more pangram sheets. Use the same pangram as you did in step 1. One in your favorite of the 3 lettering styles, 1 condensed, 1 expanded. So that will be your final deliverable for the project. Try to make it really beautiful. So what's due? You are going to hand in all of the pangrams that you've done, plus selected practice sheets. You're going to put together a process packet for me. So the process packet will be put together in the order in which you did it. It's going to allow me to look through and see how you progressed. Under the deadline section, I've listed what I want in that packet. So the packet has your first practice sheet for each style. So that will be 3 pages total. So your first geometric practice sheet, your first grotesque, your first humanist. Just the first one. Even if you did 6 pages of humanist letters, I just want the first practice page. It will also have your regular width pangrams, which will be 3 pages. That's what you handed in for part 1. Then it will also have the first practice sheet for each condensed and expanded style. So that'll be 4 pages. And then your condensed and expanded width pangrams in one style. That'll be 2 pages. So for my in-person classes, I want you to bring all of these items to class session 4 along with a stapler. I'm going to show you how to assemble a physical process book. For my online courses, I want you to scan or carefully photograph each sheet and assemble it into a multi-page PDF. So put them together in the order that I've given you here, and use Acrobat Pro to make sure the pages are in the correct order and oriented to be right reading. So when I look at the PDF, I will see everything right side up. And that is what you're going to do in the next week. So let's get to work.